Thank you so much for all of you for coming to this panel session where we will hear from perspectives from instructors who have created and used H5P interactivity in their learning materials for their classroom. Before we get to our wonderful panelists, I wanted to give a little bit of an introduction to the series that the session is a part of. So this is a 3-part webinar series about interactivity in Pressbooks using H5P. And to get everyone on the same page, I did this at the first session. H5P is a user-friendly web tool that users can use to create over 50 different kinds of interactive activities. It is offered as a plugin to everyone on the Pressbooks platform, and it is included in your Pressbooks Enterprise agreement. So if your institution has an enterprise agreement with Pressbooks, it is available to you at no extra cost. It can enable active learning, which helps transform learning from a passive experience to one that is engaging and rewarding. And it does this by giving the students an opportunity to learn by quote unquote doing. By receiving real-time feedback and being able to view their progress, students can repeat and focus on the specific sections where they need help. For you as the instructor, this provides you with the opportunity to create authentic and customizable learning opportunities for your students. So today we're going to focus on that instructor experience, the creation, use, potential, and the potential impact of these activities in the classroom with 3 instructors who have experience creating hundreds of H5P activities for their class. They'll show us their book, give us a quick explanation of why they decided to use H5P and Pressbooks, and then we'll dive right into the panel portion of this session. But before we get to that, I'd like to start off this session with a quick introduction of who the panelists are, what they teach, and which institution they're from, and then we'll follow that with the show and tell, and then we'll go into the panel session. So I would like for the panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with Shannon.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shannon Quinn. I'm Associate Professor of Russian at Michigan State University. I've created H5P and Pressbooks projects for Michigan State, but also for the Middlebury College School of Russian. And the one I'm going to be talking about and showcasing today is for the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Let's move over to Paul.
Hello, my name is Paul Webb. I'm a professor of marine biology at Roger Williams University in Bristol, Rhode Island. And I'll be talking about a book that I put together for an introduction to oceanography course.
Thank you, Paul. And lastly, Brian.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Bich, and I'm an instructor of biology at Lake Superior College in Duluth, Minnesota. And I put together a histology manual, a histology text to accompany freshman and sophomore level anatomy and physiology courses.
Thank you so much for those introductions. As you can see, we have a very diverse panel of people who teach very different things, and I'm very excited to hear what they have to say. The session you're watching today is, like I said, the second of 3 parts. In the first session, I demonstrated how to create H5P activities in Pressbooks, and you can find the recording for that session on our YouTube channel. You're at the second session right now, or you're watching it on our recording. And the third session is taking place on Thursday, September 7th, where we will talk about Pressbooks results, a feature where these activities can be attempted by your students and for their grade to be recorded in their LMS gradebook. You can find the recording of the first session, registration for the second session, for the third session, and the panelist books on a little guide that I created. And you can find that in the chat, and if you're watching the YouTube video, you can find that in the description of the YouTube video. And the recording of this session will also go in there, so you can refer back to it for those who are watching this live. So without further ado, let's get started. So like I promised, the second portion of this session will be to do a little bit of a show and tell. I would like for each of our panelists to discuss what subject and discipline they teach. They just touched upon that. How long they have been using their book for, or how long this book has been in production for if they haven't used it, the approximate class size this is hoping to target, and in brief, why you decided to incorporate interactivities into your book, and what has been your experience using H5P with Pressbooks to do this. So I will start with Paul.
Okay, thank you. So let me share a screen. Go. Okay, so I'm assuming you can all see that. This is just the start page to my book, Introduction to Oceanography. So I first wrote this book, I think it was around 2016, 2017, something like that. before that, I had sort of been doing the OER thing on my own a bit. I had stopped using traditional textbooks in many of my courses, and I was providing full text illustrated lecture notes that I'd put together that dealt specifically with the content of the class. As many of you know, often textbooks, and aside from being expensive and everything else, maybe you only cover 2/3 of it or something in your course, and there's a lot of extraneous material. So to cut down the cost, to cut down and kind of refine the material, I decided to put together my own book for oceanography. So now it's in use. We teach multiple sections of this course every fall. This coming fall, I believe we have 3 sections of about 30 to 35 students each. That's pretty standard for us. That was another reason why I chose oceanography for my book, because multiple sections are using it at our institution, so we could have a single book, a single resource for all the instructors, rather than each one choosing potentially their own hard copy book. So in terms of the HP5 or H5P, I'm getting my things backwards here. Just the way the book is set up, pretty standard probably for most Pressbooks texts. There are chapters, and each chapter, of course, is divided up into sections, with each section having its own page. Each chapter then ends with a set of review questions, and this is where the interactive material is coming in. So just as an example, if we look at the Tide chapter, some learning objectives at the outset for the chapter, some sort of teaser blurb about something that will hopefully grab people's interest, and then move into the specifics of the content. And of course, if you've used Pressbooks or looked at Pressbooks, great way to have lots of visuals and things like that, good images in your text. And of course, being an online version, you can have animated figures and things like this, rather than just a static image in a textbook. Okay, so with each section then, I'll just skip through to the end for the interactive part. Here we go. So review questions. Mostly what I've done with these interactive things is just the end of chapter reviews. I've gone back and forth a little bit about, do I include them in the text as you go along? I haven't yet. I wrote the book, and it's probably about 3 years later, I decided to add this interactive part to it once I had the text complete. So the questions that I were using were ones that I was already using in my LMS system, and I was using that to assess my students individually, and thought, well, this would be a good addition to the book, so people outside of our institution who are using it could also have those same tools. So again, so mostly I'm just using it as the end of chapter review at this point. And if you haven't seen or played around with these multiple choice questions and click the answer and check, if they get it wrong, they can either try again, or if they still get it wrong, they can get the answer and find out what the correct response should have been. All right. So multiple types of questions, multiple choice. Obviously, things that are self-graded are important here. But in addition to just straightforward multiple choice, fill in the blanks. So requiring some text. All right, nice little star for getting it right. Multiple selection questions where there's multiple answers. Okay, and true false questions like that. So that's how I've been using it. I found it's very intuitive. As Amy said at the beginning, you don't need to know any coding. These are plug and play, and if you can type out the text for a question, you can insert these things into the text. I was sort of going back and forth about, do I put more of these in the actual text? And actually, in preparing for this webinar, I went back and sort of looked at some of the options that Pressbook has, and I'm kind of excited now to add some more because I'm not sure they were all there when I first wrote this, but things like flashcards and some of these other things I think would be great study tools to put in. And also maybe more kind of thought questions. Obviously, the questions I have here are mostly just reviewing the material, testing knowledge, but in the text at opportune moments, maybe to have some sort of not an open response question, but at least something to make them think or apply some of the material a little bit more might be another theme that I'd be interested in adding. But certainly for basic assessments, it's a great tool. It's a very easy tool to use, and I think it adds a lot to these types of texts.
Thank you so much, Paul. That's such a great overview of your book. And I like the way that you talked about the structure of your book as well. And a lot of these activities, we covered how to create them in the first session. So it ties things together really nicely. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Next, we'll move on to Shannon, who can talk about her Russian language books.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you the main page of our project, which is called the Russian Advanced Interactive Listening Series. And this is outside of Pressbooks because it involves several Pressbooks. But I just wanted to say what the background of this project is, that it was originally a project from 2003 to 2006 funded by the Department of Education. We had a whole big team. I don't really have time to introduce everyone who worked on it, but the project was housed in a piece of custom software that was created just exactly for that project, but then that software didn't end up being maintained. And so what happened was that in 2020, you may know that Adobe Flash stopped working, and so our lessons stopped working. And what we decided to do was to move the lessons to Pressbooks and H5P. The idea behind the lessons is that they're focusing on students who are in the intermediate level of the Russian language, and it's trying to move their listening skills to the advanced level. These books have been around for a long time, but in this iteration in Pressbooks, it's been a year or two that we've had them. And I personally actually don't use them in my teaching because these are for slightly more advanced students, whereas I teach beginning students. But I know that they are used at the language flagship at the University of Wisconsin and at some other programs as well. So if we go here to this page, then you can see all of these sets of lessons, each of which is in one Pressbook. So I'm going to open one of them just as an example. This one is an interview with a man named Veniamin Smechov, who's a well-known Russian actor. All of our lessons are based on clips either from Russian documentary films or from interviews with prominent Russians or experts in their field. And I just wanted to say that most of these lessons have been around, as we said, for 15 years, but one really exciting thing is that we are working on some new lessons for the first time in a while because now we have a new place to put them. And our new lessons are based on interviews with experts from Kazakhstan. And so that's really exciting that we're able to expand the places from which our interviews have come. And so we're really excited about that. And there are a lot of different ways in which we use H5P interactivity. And I'm just going to show you a couple. I only have a few minutes, and so I'm only going to show you a few. But here we have some examples where we have audio. And one of the things I wanted to say in response to that question about why did we want to include these kinds of interactions, and it's because, of course, when you're learning language, sound is so important. And so incorporating different types of media, video, audio, also images, but especially video and audio is so helpful for students. And so I'm going to show you a few examples that have different types of media incorporated. So you see here we've got, this is sort of like a true and false question, but it has a little video associated with it. Here I have a This is from Table Press, so it's not H5P, but it's integrated within Pressbooks, or it has a type of glossary that we can get to. Here I have an activity that's about the gestures that the speaker makes, and this is called a drag and drop activity. It's within an interactive slideshow course presentation. So you can see there's a lot of variety of things that you can do with an H5P. Another thing that you can do with an H5P, you can see here that our instructions are in Russian, but we don't want people to not be able to do the book because they have trouble understanding the instructions. And so we're using an H5P activity type called accordion to add in English instructions in case someone needs it, but not have it there to distract people who may not need it. And then this here is also a hint. So we've added in hints. And that's another one of the ways that I really appreciate the way H5P works, is there are a lot of ways to add in things like hints. But I wanted to show you one thing in particular. The last thing I wanted to show you is using an interactive video. We had in the previous iteration of our lessons a thing called the listening assistant, and this was a special separate piece of software that had been specially written. But within Pressbooks and H5P, we've been able to use the interactive video activity type to do very similar thing from what we used to do with what we call the listening assistant. And so what we do here is we have the clips of the person talking, and it's divided into segments. You can see here the little dots, and so in between those dots are the different segments of the video. And this allows students to get help at the moment that they need it. So if I start playing the video, you can see that different help features pop up right here when he starts talking. And so as he's talking, I can click on the different types of help, and the different types of help are something like summary, questions, keywords, grammar and vocabulary, cultural background, a transcript, and a translation. And so students are able to, when they need help, not get help when they don't need help, but when they need help, bring up what they need. So if I let him keep talking a little bit, then I can click on something and then it will pop up automatically. So if I need to look at keywords, I can click on that. Or here it gives me cultural background. And so this is really valuable because it gives students help, the type of help that they need at the moment that they need it. And I just wanted to quickly say that there are many other ways that interactive video can be used as well, and we use it in other ways, but this is one of the main ways that we're using it within this set of lessons.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I feel like you have touched on a lot there. We've seen many different kinds of activity types now. And although Pressbooks can teach you how you can create those activities, it's another thing to be able to see these instructors actually apply them and use them very creatively to fit their purposes. And I think something that both Paul and Shannon have touched on so far is the idea that you can always go back and add more when you have more funding, when you have more team members, or if you feel like it. And you can change these activities, edit them, add new ones at any given point, so that it really adds to the customizable experience as well, so that you can revise your learning materials as you see fit. Thank you very much, Shannon. And Brian, I will give you the last 5 minutes slot before we head into the panelist Q&A.
All right, thanks. Before I show you my book, I just wanted to mention a couple things about my histology atlas, because a lot of people might not know what histology is. So histology is the study of tissues, and the textbook I created is designed to be a supplement to the laboratory portion of freshman and sophomore level anatomy and physiology courses, where we study human tissue as part of the lab. So along with like studying the gross anatomy of the muscles and the bones, we also look at microscopes to study the tissue of the body. So as you can imagine, histology is a very visual field, and it really is very abstract because you have to look at a flat image from a microscope and then try to think about it three-dimensionally. So I just recently finished my book this summer, in fact, as part of a sabbatical project. And so I'm just starting, whoops. hopefully you can all see this, but this is just one chapter from my book. This happens to be the stomach. And I have lots of images to go along just with showing my chapters before I get into the text. But the way my book is organized is I've got it organized by organ system, like digestive, reproductive, respiratory, and so on. So this chapter on the stomach happens to come from the digestive system chapter. And this is what the stomach looks like under a microscope. And each of my individual chapters that talk about different subjects starts out with just a quick written overview of the characteristics of that organ and then the characteristics of the tissue at the microscope level, so the magnified level. And then I quickly get into the visual part. So the way I envision using this in my classes, and I'm about to start this in about a month, this class starts, but I will have my students read these intros ahead of time before they come to lab. And I use a lot of the image sliders because I've had probably a couple thousand images that I took as part of a sabbatical 14 years ago. And I've been giving them out to students a variety of ways over the last 10 years or so. And as you can see, my annotated images also have these little written descriptions under them. So I'm hoping my students will benefit from this by kind of preparing for lab before they come in by already knowing kind of how to study the tissue by having these image sliders in place. And then another important part of each chapter is I have an image slider created, which I call a microscopy image slider. And the microscopy image slider is designed to help them go from taking the microscope slide literally out of the box where we store them, how to put it on their microscope and get in focus on the correct area, which is actually something I spend tons of time running around a lab with 24 students in it, trying to get them all oriented on how to use the microscope. So this should hopefully make my work in the laboratory a lot easier. So I'm showing them, on that first picture here, where on the slide do they actually go and focus? So this is even before they put it on the microscope. And then I lead them from low power to more advanced, higher power images. And these images here are all annotated. So that's how each chapter is set up. Then what's really going to be helpful for my students, and this is the main reason that I developed this book, is that once I get into the chapter, each unit, for example, over here on the left are all the different topics of my digestive system unit. I've got a title here, Digestive System Practice Quizzes and Interactive Learning Activities. And that's where I have a lot of the other activities besides just image sliders. So I've got image sliders set up as quizzes. I've got several different types of quizzes for each subject. And this particular one, I've got things labeled. They have to go through and write stuff down, almost like an old-fashioned way, and then they find the answers at the end. I got other ones where I've got images labeled with pointers on them, and then the next slide, when they go through, gives them the answer there. And I think I mentioned this before, but histology is such a visual field, so if they can literally study hundreds of images in a short period of time, it really helps their learning when they get immediate feedback about what the answer of something is. Now, in addition to the quizzes, I also have lots of the hotspot images. I really use these a lot because of their visual character, where I have a static image where students can click on a certain area after they already try to guess in their head what this is, and then it pops up with the answer. So I have lots of these in my book. Pops up with the answer right away. Again, the immediate feedback is really important. And I have these in this unit review of all the different organs that were in that particular, digestive tract unit in this case. So I've got lots of hotspot images set up for review. And even though this has only been in place a short period of time, I've already gotten a lot of really positive feedback from my colleagues that plan to use it in all their classes as well. And then I also wanted to show I use anything that I could use that's visual. Besides the hotspot images, I did flashcards here, which is also something I think my students will like. Well, they have to look at the picture. These are a little smaller, but they can then, write in the answer and check it right away. I've got the matching, which I guess they call a drag and drop. So before I actually created my book as part of my sabbatical, I basically went into all the H5P activities that were available. And I basically, I don't even remember how many there were, but maybe 20 different options or something. And I tried to figure out what would work best for my histology book. And after listening to Shannon talk, now I'm kind of wishing I hadn't used some live video clips where I actually pull up an image and screen capture and voiceover and draw on the image, because I think that would really help my students for the introductory part of each tissue. So in summary, that's why I created my book, and I'm really looking forward to using it over the years to come.
Thank you so much. This is so much hard work on the part of all three of you. I really appreciate all of, not only the fact that you were all able to talk about your actual books, but what I really enjoyed was with all these instructors here with very limited time and limited personnel even, I bet the fact that you talked about your method a little bit, I think is really, really helpful for other instructors, I'm sure, just in terms of the kinds of like how you managed to piece your book together, the timelines that were required, the sort of the effort you put into determining what kind of layout your textbook might be best suited for, or you know, how to structure your book. And those are all really, really helpful practical tips, I think, even on top of just the actual lessons and the content itself. So thank you so much for that show and tell. If you have any questions for our panelists, we can leave them in the chat. All right, so without hesitating or wasting any more time with my blabbing, let's move into the Q&A. So now that you've presented your books, I'm curious to know, our first question is, I'm curious to know what the greatest benefit to using H5P in your learning materials is, or if you haven't used your book yet, what you foresee that being and how it might impact your students' teaching and learning. Paul, I'll start with you again.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Well, I mean, the greatest benefit, and I think you've seen from especially the last two examples, is just so much more interesting than a static text. And I've got some great ideas from the last two presenters, like, oh, I can, yeah, I should do that. I can add this, and so I think that's the big advantage. I think students are more likely to utilize texts when they are more interesting. I have never been an instructor who sort of says, for tomorrow, read this chapter and then read this chapter. And texts for me have always been a bit more supplemental and kind of here's where to go for the more detailed story. So I think having those kind of activities are certainly something that would encourage students to go and do that extra reading, do those exercises, and help them learn.
Thank you. Very, very helpful. We'll move to Shannon.
Yeah, I think I mentioned some of the things that I think are some of the greatest benefits. I agree with Paul that it makes it more interesting, and that is partly because we can really easily bring together different media types. We can bring together visuals and audio and video, along with activities that then, and I think it was Brian that mentioned immediate feedback. It's so helpful in many cases for students to get immediate feedback on what they've done, instead of, you know, do a homework assignment, make 10 mistakes in a row, and then not get feedback on it until, you know, tomorrow or next week. They can see what they're, you know, get feedback on what they've done right now. Another thing that H5P is really good at is giving you opportunities to give targeted feedback. And there's some research to show that feedback is most helpful when it's targeted. And there are a lot of options. When you first start with H5P, you maybe just use the default, but as you get more time, as you get more experience with it, you find a lot of the options that are a little bit hidden at first because they're in the defaults, where you can give a lot more targeted feedback. Like, let's say you have a question where there's a common mistake that students make, you can use that as a distractor and then target feedback for each wrong answer. And that can be really helpful for when students make particular mistakes. There's also a lot of adaptivity that H5P can do. So for example, one of the things I've been experimenting with lately in the interactive video activity type is that there's a feature called Crossroads, where you can have the video pause, and then there are several buttons, and then the buttons allow the student to skip to a different part of the video. So what I've been doing is having students do questions, and then if they get the questions right, then they can skip to the next clip. Or if they still need help, need to listen again, need to try again, then it can automatically skip them back to the beginning of that particular clip, or that place in the clip where that particular question was addressed. And so that ability to be adaptable is really, really valuable, I think, within H5P.
Totally, yeah, that's a very good point that you're touching on there. And those, if you're not familiar with H5P, a lot of those adaptable settings are they're called behavioral settings. So in H5P, when you're creating the activities, you can decide whether or not this shows by default or what kind of mistakes you're willing to allow, which I can imagine is very helpful for a language instructor, especially with very common, routinely made mistakes. So that's very helpful. Thank you very much, and thanks for building on Paul's answer. And Brian, we'll go to you.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, I touched a little bit on what I think the biggest advantages are going to be in my classroom, but I think the fact that histology and looking at things through a microscope, what students quickly find out is that even though you're studying the same tissue over and over, it looks very different from one spot to another. So what's really critical and what I've set up in my textbook is they can look at lots of different images in a very short period of time. So high repetition, they're all similar, but they're all subtly different. And then they get immediate feedback. So once they've kind of learned what to look for, they can progress even faster. So I guess for me, it's kind of the visual repetition side of histology that's really helpful. Again, and like Shannon said, that immediate feedback that they get, knowing whether they were right or wrong. And then also to add what Paul said, I think it's also just more fun. You know, when I look at some of my old histology books from before, it's almost like, how did I even learn from this? Because the book is so plain. There's only one example, and it's, you know, so non-interactive. I'm really excited to use it for those reasons, and I think my students will like it as well. So again, those are all really important reasons to have the interaction activities.
I'm also muted. I totally agree. I studied science. I studied chemistry at university, and even though it's a very applied topic, I found it very strange that my textbooks were so static. So I think you raised some very fair points there. Thank you very much. Those were awesome answers, and I think that you had actually covered a lot of it in your show and tells. So very happy, very glad that you were able to build on those answers, build on the previous responses. The next question is, what was your process for deciding where to use H5P activities, which topics to focus on, and what types of activities to create? And where did you get your inspiration from? I know that's a multifaceted question. You can answer that however you'd like, but you're all experts in your field, and I know that you've all been teaching for a very long time, so I bet that there's a lot of material to sort through and decide how to teach them. And Shannon, we'll start with you this time.
I've done a lot of different H5P projects, and I think it's different for each one, but maybe if I just focus on this one that I've been showing off today. As I said, we based these lessons on Russian documentary films and interviews with well-known Russians or experts. And in this case, we were trying to let the content lead where it goes, so where we take students. And so the main thing I'm thinking about is, what do students need to know in order to understand what this person is saying? And so we take the clips, and then we try to add the scaffolding beforehand or while they're watching the clips, or even after they watch the clips, in order to allow them to understand what's going on. And the nice thing is that this tool gives you so many ways to do that. And so we have activities that are beforehand that acquaint them maybe with some of the main ideas of what the person's going to say. And then I showed you the listening assistant, which gives them sort of just in what we might call just in time help. And then, of course, when they continue after they watch the clip for the first time, we have them watch it several times with different purposes, and all of which kind of contribute to their understanding of the clip itself. As they continue to do those interactive activities, they understand a little bit more each time about that clip. And so in this case, it's really kind of inspired by what's within the clip, because for students of language, of course, being able to understand experts is something that is a challenge and has to be a goal for them. So we trying to give them the support that they need to be able to get to that level in their understanding.
Totally, and using that real life material that already exists is a really great way to study. I've been learning French for many years now, and I know the value of that. So thank you, Shannon. Brian, we'll move over to you.
I guess the inspiration for me to create my book was I had already been, having many of my images on this domain in the website for our school. And for some reason, the administration decided they wanted to do away with this certain aspect of our website. And all of a sudden, I had these 2,000 images that I knew my students were going to be very upset if they didn't have the ability to access. So I completely stumbled into Pressbooks by accident. Well, I went to our librarian who knew about Pressbooks, and she told me about Minnesota State's licensure. And I applied and got the ability to do the Pressbooks. And if it hadn't been almost by accident, I wouldn't have known of this as an option. And then once I saw, she told me about H5P. And I didn't even know what it was. Like I was 5PH, P5H. I had no idea what that even meant. And she didn't really even know either. But then when I investigated and I looked into it and found all these things I could do with interactive activities that were available through H5P, that kind of opened up this whole world to me. So then I decided to apply for a sabbatical because I knew what I really wanted to do was make this comprehensive book. So I guess that's where it all bubbled up out of this kind of almost accidental. But once I got into the H5P, I'd say one recommendation I would have, I know that's one of maybe the future questions you wanted to bring up, Amy, but for me, what I had to do is, before I even started writing my book and then adding the images in, I had to go investigate all the different H5P interactive, whatever you call them, tools or activities, and figure out, well, what were going to work best for my textbook. And I couldn't use all of them. I wanted to become like really proficient at using the best 3 or 4 that I thought would be the most helpful to my students. So I'd say, as a recommendation for anyone wanting to incorporate these interactive activities into a textbook or even creating one in the future, it would be investigate all of them, like very thoroughly if you can, and really critically think about which of these activities would really serve my students the best, and then try to get very proficient. It's very quite easy. I'm not at all technologically savvy. I had no problem figuring out the 4 or 5 different ones that I used, but it was very helpful for me to come up with a plan. Well, how was I going to make my images? I had to create my images and then put them into these interactive activities. And I'm assuming, Shannon had to figure out how to create these video clips with sound, and Paul had to figure out maybe make images or design them. And it takes a lot of time. That's where I spent most of my time. And that would be my one suggestion for people, is really try to, before you start really making it, try to sit down and really plan out strategically which 3 or 4 or 5, that's what worked for me personally, of these activities are really going to serve your students best in this particular course that you're making this textbook for.
Thank you, Brian. That's super interesting and very helpful. I think that's a very good suggestion to anyone who might feel a little bit overwhelmed with getting started, because I know that that sounds very daunting, and it is, right? So that's an excellent sort of tip for those looking to get started. Thank you. And Paul, we'll move to you.
Okay. Well, in terms of inspiration, there's nothing particularly inspired about a 5-question multiple choice quiz at the end of a chapter. I think people have been doing that for a long time. But the idea, as I said, I had, like Brian, I knew nothing about the H5P when I started this. And I had actually written the book a few years before adding any of this interactive material. And in my case, the decision to add the interactive was helped along by the fact that I was already using these things in our own LMS. So I already had all these quizzes that I was giving for my students. It was very easy then to just translate those into Pressbooks. So unlike Brian, I didn't go and investigate all the different possibilities. It was, I have this material, it would be a good thing to add to this, and here's how that's done. But to sort of follow up what Brian said, that also shows that it is very easy to get started with something very simple. We've seen some very involved, very well thought out examples, and then we saw what I did, which is just, here's a quick question, and that by itself adds something to the experience. So you don't have to, you can start simple and build on that later.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your book has a lot of value in the fact that you have so many activities, Paul. It's amazing how many activities you have. So I think just even having students read the chapters and then be able to jog their memory and see how much they've retained after a unit or a chapter is so valuable. So yes, I think that's still valuable regardless. So thank you. And we come to our last question. Before I see some questions in the Q&A, and we'll in the chat, sorry, and we'll come back to them after. But in brief, because we're running out of time, the last question is: what is your top tip or best practice you would recommend to someone who's getting started with creating H5P activities in Pressbooks? And Brian, we'll start with you because I know you just touched on it. But if you have anything else, or if you wanted to sort of reiterate what you said, go for it.
Yeah, I would say I was coming from it from a very kind of predefined angle. I already had these several thousand images, and I know one of the attendees just posed a question for me about these images, and they're asking, did I have to get relicensure? Well, these images were all my own pictures that I took myself using a microscope camera. So they were already my images. I'm not sure how you would do that if you didn't own the particular images or whatever that you wanted to use. But again, I would say for me, my biggest tip was kind of what I mentioned before. I was worried we might run out of time, which is why I mentioned that. For me, it was critically important. I didn't want to create a book and then find out later that I wish I would have used some of the different activities than what I was using, or maybe get halfway through and then decide, oh, this other one works better. So it was really kind of hard for me to, I spent actually a lot of time looking at all the different interactive activities and thinking about, well, how can I use this? And like I said, I kind of now wish I had some video narratives, screen capture videos that my students could play where I draw in real time and show them aspects. And that's something that now I'm kind of regretting that I didn't do it. So I would say be really thorough in investigating upfront all the different options for interactive activities. And then maybe for you, you don't need to be proficient, but I felt like I had to be proficient at about 4 or 5 of them that I thought would work best in this particular text for this group of students. And that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Thank you, Brian. And Paul, we'll go to you.
Okay. I might differ a little bit from Brian. I think one of the beauties of this platform and these kind of things in general is that you can change them on, at a whim. And I know it's if someone outside or is using your book, they don't want to, every time you go back, it's different, it's changed, and now you have to do all these things. But I think my advice might be just to start and just try it, and try something easy, try something simple. And once you've done it, it's not there forever. You can change it, you can update it, you can improve it, you can add more things. As I said, I've learned some things that I may now have to go back and try out in my book. So I think that would be my advice. Don't be afraid just to try it. Any little thing you can do is probably an improvement, and will probably make your resource more valuable, and you're not wedded to it. And that's one of the great things about this.
Thank you so much. I like the differing approaches there. I think that's really valuable, and there's something for everyone, which I think is really great. And Shannon, we'll end off with you.
And I'm going to say a mixture of what you two said, because I'm a technology specialist. So the way I came at it was maybe more like what Brian did, just because I had already known H5P before I started working with Pressbooks, and I had worked with H5P separate from Pressbooks. So I already knew all of the activity types, and I knew what they could do. And so that is very useful, because then you can decide what works best for a particular purpose. And so if you're able to spend that time, it is really useful to know well all of the activity types, so that if you have an idea, you can think of where it could work best. But on the other hand, I know a lot of people don't have that time built into their workload to learn new tools. And just to echo what Paul said, it is a tool that it can look overwhelming at first, because there are so many activity types available. And occasionally when I show people H5P, they say, that's too much, I can't do that. It makes me a little sad, because I think that there is a middle ground there. Like what Paul said, you can get started, try something, and then learn more as you go, because the interface, once you learn one of the activity types, it makes it easier to learn the next one. So if you learn how to do the multiple choice, the interface for another activity type looks very similar to it. And the interactive video has a bunch of the other activity types built into it. So within interactive video, you can include a multiple choice or a true false. And so once you've learned those, then it makes it easier for you to learn the others. And so I think depending on your time and the way you want to approach it, you can do it either way, and either way can really work.
Thank you
Amy,
so much, Shannon.
is it okay if I just interject something?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, in response, I just want to make sure everybody understands. I think one of the main reasons I felt like I needed to spend a lot of time up front thinking about the interactive activities is I had this sabbatical block of time that I had to create my book. And I knew that if I had to create this book, it was my sabbatical proposal, but I knew that if I kind of ran out of time, I wouldn't have enough to get it back in. But the other two, Paul and Shannon are exactly right. It's very easy to go back and change stuff, add stuff, edit it, tweak it. That's what's so nice about it. So I hope people weren't thinking, oh, I have to have this math. I have to have a sabbatical to create a textbook. It's not at all that way. It's very easy to do it in little bits and pieces and not worry about it being perfect right from the start. Like I kind of had to worry about that, but normally you would not have to do that. Just get started, jump in, create something, and then just constantly tweak it and improve it.
Yeah. No, it didn't come off that way, but
okay,
I
good. I was hoping
appreciate
it didn't come off that way.
No, I think you offered one way of doing it that might be helpful if if you're teaching something very specific. For example, taking a lot, if you have, thousands of images, it kind of makes sense that, you would have to search for something, or it was best for your practice to look for something that might be a type that might be best suited for the kind of activities that you wanted to create. But thank you, all of you, for your wonderful answers. I have learned a lot today, and that will help me better support instructors such as all of you. Really appreciate all of your different disciplines and your different practices, and how you create content, and the value that you think interactivity brings into your book. So thank you to all of our panelists. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all of you for joining. So now we only have 8 minutes left. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please ask them now. I am happy to stay on past 4 p.m. Eastern to answer any questions that you might have about Pressbooks and H5P. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please unmute and ask them now. Otherwise, I'll take the ones in the chat. I think, Brian, you answered the question in the chat about, oh, yes, because you took the Microsoft images.
They were my own images. Yeah, they were all my own. Mm-hmm.
Yes, okay, that makes sense. So I can address some of the questions that are in the chat so that we can wrap things up early. Are the images and interactives in the H5P screen reader compliant? So I think if you look in our guide, and I think Shannon linked the same link in the chat, the link about accessibility, their content type recommendation. So on there, you'll be able to see which types of content is more accessible than others, and what content types they would recommend versus not recommend. So I would recommend that you have a look on there. Can you host an interactive Pressbooks on a public-facing website outside of the LMS? So you should be able to embed a Pressbooks book onto anywhere where you're allowed to embed content, so long as your book is public. But that depends on the technology that you're trying to embed it on. Kelly asked, I love all the activities, but was wondering if the design might be updated at some point. It's multiple choice, etc. questions of a little bit older web font and designs, just for student face validity. Definitely appreciate that feedback. H5P is an open source tool that Pressbooks has adopted as a plugin. So we don't have any sort of jurisdiction over their design choices. So we would definitely recommend going on h5p.org and making that recommendation to them. They have a widely used forum, and I believe their staff are pretty respondent on there. But that's a great suggestion. I would also recommend that I think there's a way to manipulate the CSS. If that's interesting to you, I would recommend that you check that out, but that is unfortunately not something that we support. That's another question. Do all Pressbooks need to be open access, or can there be a fee to use set for them? So they do not all need to be open access. You can set all rights reserved, public domain, and all the Creative Commons licenses in between, but we do not set a paywall, and there's no way to set a paywall from Pressbooks itself. So just keep that in mind. Although if you would like to create a Pressbook and print it out and then sell it, you're welcome to do that. But all of the beautiful interactive content that we've talked about in today's session would not be brought into your PDF, because unfortunately you don't have the ability to click on your PDF if you print it out. So keep that in mind. All right, those are all the questions. If anyone has any more, please include it in the chat and I'm happy to stick around. But thank you all for coming, and thank you all to those who are watching in the recording. And thank you again to Shannon, Paul, and Brian for taking the time today to talk about their amazing books, and good luck on your semester. Bye.